Good evening and welcome to the Week in Politics, a week dominated by James Riley and his logistical logarithmics, by hopes of a deep bank debt deal before the budget and by speculation about what's going to be in that budget. To discuss these and other issues, I'm joined in studio by Labour's Alan Kelly, Minister of State at the Department of Transport, Joan Collins, the People Before Profit and ULA TD for Dublin South Central, and by Fianna Fáil Whip Sean O'Farrell. We'll be hearing from them in a moment. Micheál Lehane reporting there. Alan Kelly, the view of the Labour Party conference in April, I think it was, in Galway was very clear. Stop the subsidy to private schools, completely withdraw the 96 million euro a year. Is that what Ruairi Quinn's going to do?
Well, I certainly think it's going to be looked at. Can I say that I personally agree with it? I agree with the party's decision at the conference in Galway. I think this funding is a luxury rather than a necessity. However, having said that, there are practical issues that do need to be looked at. In relation to this, we have to look at what will happen if it is withdrawn. Will it end up costing the state more? Will we have to look at the whole issue of paying the capitation? And that's all being looked at currently by the department, by an internal working group. And we'll await the results. But personally, and I know my Labour Party colleagues feel very similar, personally I do think it is something that's going to have to be addressed.
Aodhán Ó Ríordáin in that report by Micheál Lehane was suggesting that perhaps another move on the pupil-teacher ratio might be the way forward, that would save some money without causing so much problems.
Yes, I think that is a very practical way of looking at this, and that is certainly an option that I think is a very strong possibility. We do need to look at the fact that there's 55 schools here. Or 56. There is a concern in relation to religious minorities and schools that operate particularly in rural areas where there's very few options, whether it be Jewish schools, Church of Ireland schools, etc. And that is a consideration I suppose we would have to look at. But in principle, I think the day of being able to give 96 to 100 million for private schools is something that is going to come to an end. Joan Collins of the United Left Alliance, I presume you wouldn't disagree with that?
I absolutely agree with it. Last year when Ruairi Quinn crazily attempted to cut in the DEIS and the SNAs, was one of our calls. They should have used that 100 million to protect the students and that in the schools that needed it most, because we know that it's a very privileged education, and I think that even one school on the south side won't take students from the north side, etc. So I think it's a resource that is not needed in the private schools, and people actually that send their children to private schools can well afford to send their children there. And I just think the thing on the pupil-teacher ratio, I have a lot of contact with people in teachers, and they're saying that they don't have the resources. They don't have the resources there to give the education that's needed, and that we have the actual highest pupil-teacher ratio in Ireland compared to other European countries. So it's not an issue.
But I think that the point was that the pupil-teacher ratio in fee-paying schools is now 21 to 1, whereas in other schools it's 19 to 1, and maybe that would be a way. But what about the argument that Oliver Murphy of Castleknock College was putting forward there, and I suppose he would say that, wouldn't he, that if the money is withdrawn, they simply won't be able to operate and the pupils will end up being educated at state expense?
Well, I think that the people, as I said, a very privileged group of people, they still have an awful lot of wealth. We see that in the figures, the increase in wealth they had over the last number of years. We've seen that in the rich list, etc. And people who send their children to private schools can well afford to pay for them. So I don't see that as a problem.
Okay,
I think the schools will continue.
Okay, Sean O'Farrell of Fianna Fáil, what's your view on this?
Well, firstly, I think we need to see the audit that Ruairi Quinn promised produced, because it's only on the basis of those facts that we can make decisions. I predict that he will not remove this subsidy, and I think it's a bit wrong to portray these private schools as being the preserve of the super rich. There are many middle-income families who make decisions and make sacrifices to send their children to schools that charge fees but don't charge exorbitant fees. I think in addition to that we have to look at the very particular position of the Church of Ireland schools. I think their capital funding their current funding is about 38 million out of that 100 million envelope, and we certainly cannot do anything, I would suggest, to undermine those schools which the state has supported down through the generations, and I think we need to continue to do so.
And why do you think Ruairi Quinn won't withdraw the money? Why are you so certain about that?
Well, I suspect that there are more people supporting Ruairi Quinn who send their children to fee-paying schools than there are who support people in my party.
In leafy Dublin South East, what do you think of that, Alan Kelly?
I suppose this is a question about fairness. he has a number of mechanisms by which he can address this. The actual funding itself, which can be changed, the pupil-teacher ratio, which I definitely think is something that is going to be looked at, or a combination of both. But it is a question of fairness. Rory has already showed that the public schools are the priority. If you look at the school building programme, no private schools have got any funding from the school building programme, the most comprehensive school building programme in the history of the state, which I welcome, because public schools needed it. If you look at the summer work scheme, even the smaller capital grant scheme, again, no private schools got any funding out of it. So, we have addressed this from a capital point of view, and we do now need to address it from a current point of view as well.
But as Joan Collins pointed out in the budget last year, I mean, what did he do? He hit DEIS schools.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, Rory at the time pointed out that he did have to review that. It was a mistake, and it was addressed subsequently. But he is facing into further challenges this year from a budgetary point of view. He has limits on the areas that he can use to address the budget, and this is certainly one that I personally feel and a lot of my colleagues feel needs to be addressed.
OK, Joan Collins, I mean, obviously the government is committed to a certain level of cutbacks at budget time, whether one likes it or not. Education is a big spending department. Money has to be saved somewhere.
I don't agree. I think we have to look at things differently in this country. People would know that I'm from a socialist background. Even capitalism can actually can resolve these issues by looking at where the wealth is, taking the money from the wealthy and putting it into where we need to keep our education at a high level, that we can actually educate children to go into further higher technology, etc. This is going to have a huge impact in general, any sort of cuts at all. And just to say, Alan, that last year when Rory Quinn attempted to cut the DEIS and the DEIS schools, it was because the people revolted nearly and took Rory Quinn on.
Because Labour Party backbenchers
exactly,
revolted in fairness.
And he actually took increase the 1.5% more the maintenance going to schools, so it was actually taken out of the school budgets anyway. So it wasn't a step back and then they weren't hit another way.
Well, OK,
so, but that's caused an awful lot of problems for schools to maintain and heat and everything the schools.
But pending the collapse of international capitalism and the introduction of socialism in this country, we do need to balance the books at some stage, surely.
Well, I think we should go after the wealth that's there in this country. We know that. OK, no, Alan, the top 5% of the wealthiest people in this country had assets of 45 billion 2 years ago. If you put a 1% tax on that, you'd have 2 billion. You put 5%, that'd be 10 billion. And it's actually gone up another 12 billion in the last 2 years to 62 billion. There's loads of wealth there. If you capped public sector workers are at €100,000, if ministers took a cut, if TDs took a cut, if you put in taxation that would target at least 5 billion out of the pockets of the very wealthy, we could start managing where we actually protect them in education and health, etc. And that's the way it should be looked at.
Well, what about that, Kelly? That would be the socialist alternative to what
that's
Labour
a
Party is doing.
midway alternative between.
The Group Public Policy.ie have recently produced a report which I think you should read, Joan. From a taxation point of view, we have one of the most progressive taxation systems in Europe. Yes, there can be refinements made in it. I expect that there will be refinements made in it to make it even fairer. Those who are earning over 100,000 are paying quite a substantial amount of tax. Personally, I believe they should be paying more. And that's going to have to be, I suppose, looked at in this budgetary run. But it doesn't get away from the fact that from a political point of view, we need to address the deficit. We need to look at where this 3.5 million is going to come. We're not living in fairyland like yourself as regards your economic policies, and we're going to have to deal with it in a real way. OK, well, sorry, I'd better bring Sean O'Friel in here. Sean O'Friel, the government is committed to certain cutbacks in the budget because of the deal that the former government negotiated with the Troika, and some of that is going to have to come out of education. But your party leader has been saying that education shouldn't really be touched. Is that realistic? Well,
education is going to be the driver of the economy into the future. I mean, we have got to prioritise, and Fianna Fáil in government has always had education as one of our priority departments. Now, to go back to the subject matter of this debate, if we had the Minister's audit, we would be able to look at areas where savings could be achieved in terms of these private schools. And if those savings were achieved, then we could address the crisis that exists in many schools in terms of the special needs assistance, the need for additional resource hours, and in particular, I would suggest, a critical area, the whole area of guidance, which was shamefully cut in the last budget, and never more was there a need for guidance than there is currently. We need people to go on to third level education. We need them to be in a position to identify the courses that are most likely to suit them, and there will be an inevitable cost to us, I think, at third level from taking away the guidance service that Rory Quinn has done.
But where,
because people will find themselves undertaking courses that they're not ideally suited to, and having to repeat.
All well and good, but how are you going to balance the books? Where are you going to get the money within the Department of Education budget to pay for that?
Well, I'm saying you can look at this area as one area where savings can be achieved. I'm saying if they can be achieved, some of those saved monies should be directed into these particular areas, particularly of guidance and resource.
Okay, just one point to you, Joan Collins, if I may. The point Sean O'Farrell mentioned earlier about Church of Ireland schools in particular, who religious minorities and the protecting the ethos. I mean, you say you want this money removed. Would you make an exception in that case?
I don't think so. I think these institutions can well continue their ethos on the basis of fee paying. But just look at that figure: 77 million cuts we want to bring in, and it's 100 million going into private schools. That's what we have to look at. That's the reality. And that cut wasn't made, we wouldn't have to cut into the education budget coming up.
And finally, Alan Kelly, we've spoken about Minister Quinn's audit. When are we likely to see it?
I understand that the audit is imminent. It'll be available in the next few weeks, and it'll form the basis for the budget as regards the decisions he has to make. I have to say that he has a very large challenge, but I've never seen a more reforming Minister for Education in many years. What he's done in relation to the junior cycle in the last week is exemplary.
Okay, well, thanks for the advert.